Hey, Hubwood here. Today I've got a somewhat special video for you because I was just grabbing this guy over here from a local sales platform for about €450, and it contains a Xeon processor and a Nvidia Quadro P2000 together with 64 GB of DDR4 RAM, and according to the guy I got it from, a pretty good motherboard, including two 512 GB SSD. So I'm going to find out if this was a good deal or not, and we're going to take a look inside, how it looks and how the system is performing in games and PC Mark and Cinebench and stuff like this. So let's just go, let's open this thing and find out what's inside. Okay, so now let's have a look. Let me pump up the light to see how it looks. Okay, it's a bit dusty. That's too much, it's a bit dusty, but I guess we can fix that. Yeah, that hasn't been cleaned in quite a while, I guess. But other than that, it kind of looks promising. Now you can see there's 4 slots for the RAM. In this case, it's on both sides of the fan. And over here, there's the SSDs. And that's the P2000. Which actually has only DisplayPort connections and nothing else. Well, that's fine, I guess. Oh, and quite a lot of connections over here. I like that, that's good. Take a look at this. Okay, and a pretty good power supply, the Revolution XT, the Enermax 730 watt, according to the seller. And a so-called Alpenföhn CPU fan, which, it clearly needs some care and some loving. All right, so I'm going to test the PC and then I'm going to clean and fix it and maybe apply some new thermal paste on the GPU and compare it with the state I've got it in just right now to see if it makes any difference. Okay, so let's go. Now we're going to actually give it a first start. The monitor's hooked up. And let's see what's happening. I heard a click. It sounds like everything's up and running. Let's have a look. Okay, it posted. That's looking good. All right, that was quick. He already installed a fresh Windows for me when I picked it up. And okay, looking good so far. That was a very quick boot for an older PC like that. Cool. Okay, let's have a first quick look at the temperatures, which seem to be pretty good. 25 degrees Celsius. I wonder if it's an offset in there that's not showing us the real temperature, because 25 seems to be a bit low. Even on idle, considering it's a room temperature of 21 degrees. I don't know. We will see about that later. But the rest of the temperature seems to be okay so far. Okay, that's good. Let's have a look at the GPU, which is idling around, where is it? There it is, 40 degrees Celsius. That's pretty good, all right. 2000 RPM. So the fan's running and it's not loud. I don't know. I was expecting the whole PC, the whole system to be a bit louder considering it's so dusty. But we will see about that loudness when we put it under load and the temperatures as well. Please mind it still has the unclean status with a lot of dust. So now the installed CPU actually is a Intel Xeon E5 1620V4, which is a 4-core 8-thread CPU that can deliver 3.5 or 3.6 GHz on all cores when under load. And the installed memory seems to be, according to this, it's only 2400 MHz, but I think it's just a problem that the XMP wasn't loaded properly. Or maybe it's the case that with all 4 banks occupied, it's not possible to run these RAM sticks on the full speed that they could deliver. So we'll have to check out that in the BIOS later. But the 4 RAM sticks actually are pretty new. They're all from 2019, so they're about 2 years old only. So this was the first run in 3D Mark Firestrike after installing the newest Nvidia drivers, resulting in a total score of 8,322 with a physics score of 9,672 and a graphics score and a physics score of 11,288. So that's not half bad, I guess. We should see some gaming performance from this little fella. The Samsung Evo actually was or is in quite a good condition, I would say, with 3,800 hours runtime, which is not that much, and crystal disk info giving a lifespan of 99%. I don't think that's very accurate, but you know, and the other drive was used a bit more with 14,600 hours, the Sandisk, and it's also a bit slower. I've tested both drives, and the Samsung was getting around 500 reading and writing speed, and the Sandisk was a bit slower with about 350 to 500 megabyte writing speed. I guess I'm going to use this one in my laptop as a second SSD drive. In Cinebench R15 I'm getting a score of around 745, which is what you would get back in the day for a 4-core 8-thread CPU, I guess. The XEON E5 1620 is actually almost comparable to a i7 6700, I mean the non-K version. In PC Mark 10 I was getting a total score of 4,234, which is kind of respectable, I guess, for a CPU that's quite a few years old, paired with a GPU that's quite a few years old. Okay, so after 15 minutes of burning in with MSI Combustion and Prime 95, I am getting temperatures for the GPU of around 77 degrees Celsius and the CPU around 75 degrees. And the CPU is not throttling, but the GPU is throttling a bit down to 1500 megahertz. And we will see how those temperatures will be after cleaning the fans and applying new thermal paste. But the noise levels are actually quite still acceptable. The fan is not getting too loud, neither on the CPU or the GPU. Now the total power draw when benchmarking with MSI Combustion and Prime 95 is only 190 watt, which is clearly way below the PSU's maximum capacity of 700 watt. So that's actually not much. 190 watt for both CPU and GPU being maxed out. That's actually pretty good. So the GPU actually doesn't look that bad. There's a bit dust in the fan, but I guess it's not going to get much better after cleaning. We'll see about the thermal paste. I mean, the GPU is about 4 years old, I guess, so it shouldn't be completely dried out, but we will see that later. And for the CPU, just released the fan and the cooler. That does not look too good. Let me get that sharp. There's not much thermal paste on the heat spreader. Yeah, that might help reapplying the thermal paste here. And definitely cleaning up the fan. Look at that. Okay, so I stand corrected. The thermal paste of the GPU is completely dried out. Well, not completely, but almost. I didn't expect that, so this might even get us some better results after repasting. But other than that, it still looks alright, I guess. Okay, so I gave the CPU fan a good clean with a vacuum cleaner and some pressured air. We'll see if that did anything for us. I've also been cleaning the GPU fan, looks good as new to me. Alright. Okay, now after pulling out the CPU, I actually discovered, I don't know if you can see, that there was dirt underneath the CPU, but it seemed to work alright, so I hope it's not affected. Maybe that's some thermal paste. So I will have to clean that up as well. I actually didn't expect the XEON to be that big. I had XEONs before and they had a regular size, but this one's bigger. So whatever. Okay, so after reapplying the thermal paste to the CPU and the GPU, you can clearly see that the temperatures dropped by 10 to 20 degrees. The CPU now only gets 55 degrees Celsius and the GPU reaches a maximum of around 65 degrees Celsius. So that's a pretty good gain just from cleaning the fans and reapplying thermal paste once more. All right, so I guess now we're ready to benchmark some games and programs, shall we? Interestingly, installing games via, for example, GOG, I'm installing Cyberpunk 2077 right now, is really maxing out the CPU load. So the CPU actually is starting to stutter now, and you kind of notice that it's getting slow just due to downloading and installing a game. And my maximum download speed usually would be 100 megabytes per second, and I think it's limited by the CPU actually. That's quite interesting. I was using Nvidia Shadowplay for recording, which reduced the FPS by around 1 to 2%, so keep that in mind. All games were tested at 1080p if not stated otherwise. For CSGO I was using the lowest settings on 1080p. The CPU usage was around 40%, but the CPU temperature was actually ridiculously low. I mean, 40 degrees Celsius? What? Is it even on? So the average FPS was around 206 to 210 FPS with a 1% low of 95. I guess we could consider that very playable. I have to point out, the system was really quiet due to all the games I've tested. Next up was Fortnite on the so-called Pro settings, but with shadows turned on to medium, because that just makes the game look a lot better in my opinion. 64 GB of RAM should not be an issue in any game, even with the slower RAM speed. By the way, I was not able to get the 2666 MHz running. The mainboard just wouldn't accept that, maybe because all 4 slots were occupied or because the CPU would not support higher megahertz. Well, however, in Fortnite I was getting an average of around 145 FPS and a grade 1% low of 93 FPS on the Pro settings. I guess that's a pretty neat result considering Fortnite is actually getting more demanding over the years. I would actually suggest 16 GB of RAM and 8 threads, or at least a brand new 4-core CPU these days, to play this game in a satisfying way. Horizon Zero Dawn was running quite well on medium settings, which are supposed to be equivalent to the PS4 settings, I guess. That's why the preset is also called Original. You can see that the frame time graph is pretty smooth and the gameplay was absolutely enjoyable for me. It actually looks fantastic, to be honest. An average of around 45 FPS with a 1% low of 28 is quite okay actually, and you know, on today's GPU market you just take whatever you can get, I guess. But let me know in the comments if you would play the game that way. We all know Cyberpunk 2077 is pretty demanding, and so I only saw an average of around 37 FPS with a 1% low of 24 FPS on low settings here. As you can see, the frame time graph isn't that smooth either. I mean, it's playable, sure, and most certainly much better than on a PS4, I guess. But I was also testing it with some improved contact shadows, which helps a lot with the graphics, and I probably would accept the 10% performance hit. If you need more FPS, considering to play it in 900p would certainly be an option, as this would pump up the average FPS to around 47, as you can see here. So considering the total cost of all the parts sold separately would cost much more than 450 euros, and the fact that this PC is actually still quite capable, what do you think? Has it been a good deal? Let me know in the comments. I'm also quite impressed by the low TDP of the GPU with only around 70 watt, and the fact that it can game pretty good even though it's from early 2017. And I mean, it also came with 64 GB of RAM and two 512 GB SSDs, of which I am now perfectly using one in my laptop as a secondary drive, I feel quite good about this purchase, I guess. Okay, that's all for today. Consider leaving a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.